What is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. I put out new photography related videos every single Monday, so if you like this video and you want to see more like it, go and check out the other videos on my channel. You can also like this video if you like it, and that really helps me out. So in today's video, I want to tell you about my experience photographing the Roe V Wade protests down in Seattle a few weeks ago. I wanted to make this video as a way of processing the situation unfolding in the United States right now, and I also wanted to share the experience of joining in the fight against American fascism in whatever small way I was able to by attending that protest. Now, I say was, but I do fully intend to go to more protests south of the border because unfortunately I feel like this is only the beginning of a very scary downward trend in American politics. I'm not going to talk too much about that. This video is about photography, and it is about my experience as a photographer at this protest. So a few years ago, I made a two-part video series about photographing protests. I gave some tips for photographing protests and talked a bit about the etiquette and the utility of photographing protests. And I really liked that series. I think it was a pretty well thought out video. It was very long. And since then, I've photographed many protests, both as an activist and as a staff photographer. And I have a few more tips that I want to share in this video. So this video will be a bit of a companion piece to those videos, but you know, there's not enough tips in here to actually fill a companion video. So informing you about how to photograph a protest isn't really the point of this. It's mostly just sharing my experience. So I'll tell you a bit about my experience. I will share with you some tips that came to mind while I was photographing this protest and things that I have learned since my previous videos. I will explain a few things about the dynamics of protests, why I attend protests as a photographer, the utility of photography, etc. Lots of things that I covered in my previous video, but in kind of a case study example, I guess. And I'll also share a bunch of the photos that I took and explain a little bit about how I took them and why, and what kinds of sort of compositional elements went into framing and taking the photos. Yeah. So a few weeks ago, I took a solo trip down to Seattle for 3 nights, and I stayed in the crappiest motel I've ever stayed in, and I walked the streets of Seattle all day, every single day. The entire purpose of the trip was just to take as many photos as I possibly could. I really enjoy doing street photography. I do a lot of it here in Vancouver. I've walked every street in Vancouver like 20 times, and I'm over it, and I just wanted a new city to explore. The first day I was there, I spent like 12 hours walking up and down every single street and taking pictures of absolutely everything interesting that I could find. On the morning of the second day that I was there, I received a text message from my partner saying that Roe V Wade had been overturned by the Supreme Court and that I should be careful because there might be protests. So immediately I went on to r/Seattle, which is the city subreddit for Seattle. For those of you who don't know, every city or town pretty much has a subreddit, and that subreddit is a place where people discuss events and issues that are unique to the municipality. So it's a really great place to find out about anything unusual that might be happening in the city. You know, if there's a celebrity in town, or a high-profile movie that's filming, or a building burning down, or unusual weather events happening, or protests, blockades, etc. happening, you will find out about them on your city's subreddit. So on that day, I go to r/Seattle, and the top 2 posts are about protests that will be happening downtown at 5 p.m. So I plan my day around it, and I RSVP on the page. I always suggest RSVPing to protests if you would plan to be there, because it helps organizers kind of account for the scale of the event, plan safety and routes accordingly. So I got to the site around 4:40 p.m. I was a little bit early, and there was already a sizable crowd gathering in the area where the event was going to be held. And the organizers had planned ahead of time. They had flyers, they had signs already printed. I guess they were able to plan ahead based on the Supreme Court leak that happened back in March, I believe. And they also had a sound system set up and a stage, and they were passing out wire coat hangers that had things emblazoned on them like, "We will not go back." So as the crowd began to form, 5 o'clock came and went. Cars from the side streets came and blocked either side of the road, so that it was like protesters in one strip of road and then cars blocking the other motorways. And I suppose that this was done to keep the protesters safe from vehicular attacks. As comforting, I guess, as it was to have that blockade, it's also very alarming thinking of why that would be necessary. And there was a few things like that at this event. I mean, right before this, on my way over the event, I'd seen this giant billboard that was advertising bulletproof vests, and I was like, what is this country? So thank you to the people who are driving those cars. The crowd really began to fill in, and I was kind of circulating, photographing as many signs and things as I could. And at this point, I just want to talk about a few principles that I like to keep in mind when I'm photographing things like weddings and corporate events that also apply to protests. And I don't think I really mentioned this in my previous videos on the topic, but there's sort of a checklist that you can go through when photographing large groups of people doing something specific. And the checklist is as follows. So first, you want to have wide shots to establish the scene and give context for where the event is taking place. And then you want detail shots that highlight the work that people put into making this event happen. In this case, it was things like the coat hangers hanging from trees, or signs, or just people's hands at work. You want posed and candid group shots to show the relationships between attendees. You want candid shots to capture the raw emotion at the event. And you want posed single shots to capture the impact of the event on certain individuals in the crowd. So this is great for shooting weddings, great for shooting corporate events, and it's also great for shooting protests. So once the crowd had fully filled in and pretty much everybody was there, they covered not only the street, but also the surrounding area. The speakers began their presentations, and everybody was instructed to sit down. So all the people occupying the middle of the road sat down as an act of civil disobedience, and suddenly the road was filled with people sitting and listening to speakers as the microphone was passed around. During this, I was doing my best to capture the homogeneity of all of these folks sitting down without disrupting the demonstration myself, because if there's one thing that I hate, it's when a bunch of people all commit to an action in unity, and then the only people interrupting that action are the photographers and the videographers who are pointing cameras in people's faces and getting close-ups and crawling over the crowd. That bothers me a lot, and there were some photographers doing that. I think one of them might have been hired by the event organizers, so I'll give them a pass, but I was definitely staying on the outskirts of the sitting crowd. And there was this light coming through. The sun was hitting golden hour, and the light was coming through and bouncing off a window, and it created this gorgeous spotlight right on a few of the people holding signs in the middle of the crowd. So that was a really, really lovely visual in an otherwise extremely intense moment. Towards the end of the speakers' presentations, people's heads began to turn, and everybody was kind of craning over each other. The people who were sitting down began to kind of stand up, looking at something that was coming down the road towards us. And now we couldn't see it because there was this blockade of cars, but we just heard this noise. I was very scared because I, again, don't know what to expect, right? We've got this blockade of cars up for a reason. I stand up and get some high ground on a letterbox and realize that it's actually a second protest. So there's hundreds of people on this side of the blockade of cars, and now there's another group of hundreds of people on this side of the blockade of cars coming towards us. And at first I thought it might be a counter-protest, but no, it was a sympathetic protest that had also been organized for this day just by a different group. And they were all wearing green. They had green signs and green clothing. Some of them had their hair dyed green, shoes green, green stickers, passing out green flyers. It was very cohesive. So they had obviously all come from the same group or organization. It quickly became clear that their intention was not to merge with our protest, but to turn and march past. And as they turned and marched past, I made the decision to follow them. And oh my God, were they walking fast? All the marches I've been to, it's a fast as the slowest person kind of thing. This one, they were just going. They were motoring. And I really wanted to stay out in front of the protest because that's how you get all of the lead banners and the organizers with the microphones and everybody who they've chosen to lead the protest. You gotta be in front of the protest if you want to photograph them. So I was absolutely running as fast as I could, pretty much the entire time. And this is after walking around for cumulative 12 hours in the last 2 days. I was pretty tired, but I was full adrenaline. And there was this beam of light coming down, and then just as the organizers walked into the beam of light, they were spotlit by it, and then the rest of the protest was silhouetted, and it was just the most beautiful scene. I took a few pictures and then I just stood there and watched, oh my God, what a powerful movement. My heart felt so many emotions all at once. So we continued walking, I continued getting photos. There was a bunch of other photographers there, not just old white guy photographers too. There was a very diverse range of photographers, lots of female photographers, non-binary looking photographers. So that was pretty cool, seeing such a wide breadth of people coming out to kind of contribute with their photographic skill in some way or another. And then eventually we all reach Pike Place Market, and there was this crazy juxtaposition between the energy of this angry crowd and the kind of touristy, kitschy, quirky feel of Pike Place Market. And so everybody sat down and I got up some high ground on a lamppost, took some more pictures, took the opportunity to run to the washroom inside Pike Place Market, and then came out just as everybody was standing up and starting to march again. And oh my God, did they march? They marched for like 40 minutes, which was great. I, at some point, just put my camera down and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna be a participant now because I'm too tired. But there was one more set of photos that I really had to capture, and that was, you know, we're coming down this hill, and there's an empty lot here, and they're turning the corner, and the monorail goes by here, and the sun is hitting in such a way that it creates this corridor straight down the street. Sun reflects off the street, and the monorail is over top, and it just creates this set of leading lines with the sun in the background, and then having the protesters walk directly through it, backlit. And then there's a window nearby that's creating this spotlight of reflected sun that is giving fill light to the faces of the demonstrators. Oh my God, I ran as fast as I possibly could out to the very front of the demonstration, and I photographed the entire procession as it came by, doing my very best to capture each person just as they reached that spotlight of reflected light. And oh my God, I don't want to toot my own horn, but some of these photos are maybe some of the best protest photos I've ever taken. We get to a park, and there's another sound system and another stage set up, and one of the lead organizers who was in front of the protest gets up on stage and starts giving a very, very passionate speech. And I was approached by another organizer, and she gave me her contact information, and that kind of reminded me that I should definitely be finding more organizers to talk to so that I can make sure these photos get to where they need to go, because there is no point in taking photos if they're just going to sit in a private gallery. I really feel like that's kind of taking something from the movement without giving anything back. My presence there, taking photos, I am disrupting the movement in some way, right? I try to minimize that, but it's the case. And if I don't give those photos to anybody, if they're not useful to the movement in any way, then I'm just disrupting it for my own personal gain, and that's not the purpose. That's not why I was there. That's absolutely not what I would want to do. So yeah, went off, looked for some more organizers, found 2 more, got some contact information, would later send out my galleries to them, which was really nice and felt good to be able to contribute in whatever way I can. You know, a lot of these movements too have social media pages. Having content is a very important part of maintaining a social media page, and so having people who are willing to generate that content for you for free as a voluntary service, especially if they're professionals, can be very helpful. So if you're a photographer and there's a movement that you are keen on, go and photograph it, please, and do it in a respectful way, an educated way, and make sure those photos get to who they need to go to. I digress. So after I get contact information for people who are going to use my photos, I start kind of walking down the block, and it seems like the crowd from the previous protest that I was at is now joining this one in the park. And so there's a bunch of people filing down into the park from the other direction. And suddenly I am surrounded by people who are wearing all black, wearing ski masks, visors, and body armor. And I was like, oh my God, is this anarchists, or is this like a mass shooting kind of thing? And it turns out that it was Antifa. I had never actually seen Antifa before. I am from Canada. I've seen a lot of people who are labeled Antifa by alt-right or like media personalities as like a pejorative, but I've never actually seen Antifa, the real ones. So I wanted to take a picture, and immediately they were like, no photos, and I was like, right. Absolutely, I will not take photos of you. Because for those of you who don't know, Antifa is a group that engages in civil disobedience that sometimes involves things like property damage, and those things obviously are arrestable offenses. So never take photos of people who are engaged in arrestable offenses. Obviously, never do it. So I just kind of tucked my camera away at that point, because if they are going to be there and potentially committing arrestable offenses, then I don't want to be photographing anybody else who's at that event, lest they be vulnerable to the institutional oppression that may result from those arrestable offenses being committed. So tucked my camera away and just joined the protest as an activist once again. We walked away from the park after the speakers were done and started walking back to the original spot that I had joined the protest in the first place, when all of a sudden, oh my God, in front of me, somebody gets pepper sprayed. There's like yellow mist everywhere. I've never seen pepper spray in my life. Like everybody's like swarming on her. Oh my God, what's going on? What happened? What happened? And suddenly there's a bunch of cops around, which made a lot of people very uneasy. And so at the time, I didn't know who she was or why she'd been pepper sprayed. So I snapped like 2 pictures, but I still wanted to be respectful. I didn't know the situation. I wasn't gonna publicize these pictures, but later I come to find out that she was a anti-choice demonstrator screaming about God's will and God's creations, love, blah, 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 in front of a bunch of anarchists who had just been stripped of their bodily autonomy by a fascist legal authority. So I don't mind sharing you this photo of her right after she got pepper sprayed. So yeah, that's my experience. This was certainly one of the more emotionally intense protests that I photographed. I photographed a lot of like climate marches and things, and those tend to have more of a hopeful bend because, oh, we're gonna take action against climate change, are we? I don't know. This one, there was nothing like hopeful about it. People know it's just gonna get worse, and this kind of fear and anticipation of what's gonna come down the pipeline next. It was a lot to process, and I'm glad that I have this opportunity to share the story with you and to share some of the photos with you and to process it by writing a script and making a video about it. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I should say one other thing, that all of the photos that are in this video were of people who had given consent, either verbally or non-verbally, to be photographed. So for taking a lot of these photos, what I'll do is I will point at my camera, like hold it up and be like, and the person will either nod and hold up their sign, or will look away but angle the sign towards me, or will then cover their face with their sign. But all of those I would consider to be consent to photograph the sign at least, and in some cases the face as well. So all of these people have made eye contact with me shortly before being photographed by me and are aware that they are being photographed. So don't worry, I'm not outing anybody in this video. I got consent to the best of my ability. The wide shots, maybe not, because there's tons and tons of faces, but I was kind of hoping that they would be obscured just by the sheer volume of people in the crowd. Yeah, pay attention to consent. Take pictures of people who want to be photographed. A lot of them do. That's why they make the signs. They're very beautiful. They want them to be shared. They want the message to get heard. Anyways, that's everything that I have to say. I feel like I talked really fast. I thought this was gonna be a short video, but it's like a 6-7 page long script, so I don't know why I thought this was gonna be a short video. Sorry. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you enjoyed looking at the photos and hearing me talk about how I got some of them and the experience, and hopefully you feel inspired to go out and take photos of protests in your own city or nearby and join the movement and contribute to it as a photographer or in whatever other capacity that you can. Because these movements are built on people and people power, and if you've got a little bit of power as a photographer, use it to the best of your ability. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will be back next Monday with, I believe, another Seattle-related video. So you guys are getting 3 for 1 here. I did meet up with a friend in Seattle and we did a little photo collab. Stay tuned for that, and in the meantime, stay sharp and don't forget to keep shooting. Bye guys.